Rise of Skywalker had a monumental task ahead of it when it released in December of 2019, because it not only had to tie up a 40-year-old saga spanning 9 movies, but also recover goodwill from fans who felt burnt by The Last Jedi. Like most things to do with Star Wars, fans were still pretty polarized as to whether they liked what they got. But we did get answers to the big questions: who Rey really is, where Snoke came from, and how the events of the sequel trilogy connect back to the first 6 movies. But aside from the big stuff, we also learned several other important things throughout the course of the movie that answer other lingering questions, while also opening possibilities of what is yet to come in the future of Star Wars. Here are 6 of the most important, starting with our discovery that Number 6. The dark side ability to cheat death through the Force still exists. Ever since Palpatine told Anakin Skywalker the tale of his own Sith master, Darth Plagueis, fans have been fascinated by the idea that the dark side can give one the power to cheat death. While the immediate focus was on Anakin's desire to learn this power to save Padme from the death foretold in his dreams, once the sequel trilogy began and fans tried to figure out the true identity of Supreme Leader Snoke, the question then became whether Plagueis used this power to survive his apparent death and had returned in the guise of Snoke. While we now know that Snoke had no such origin, we found out that Palpatine indeed had either learned this power from Plagueis or had recovered it on his own in the years after his master's death. He used this power to save his spirit from destruction when his body perished on the second Death Star, and later planned to use it to transfer his essence from the clone body he now inhabited to that of his granddaughter Rey. In fact, the Emperor's use of this power leads us to another unsettling possibility. Number 5. The Emperor might still be alive somewhere. For 35 years, we all assumed that the Emperor was safely dead after Darth Vader sacrificed his life to chuck him down the shaft on the second Death Star. Given the long fall and the massive eruption that occurred when he hit whatever was at the bottom of that shaft, not to mention the fact that the Death Star itself was blown to smithereens only minutes later, the idea that the Emperor could have lived through the ordeal seemed highly implausible. As we now know, that's exactly what happened. This time, however, we saw him physically torn to shreds when Rey used both Skywalker lightsabers to turn his Sith lightning back at him. There's no ambiguity this time. He's definitely dead, right? Well, we can't be 100% sure, because if Palpatine already survived what no other man could have once, what's to say he can't do it again and transfer his spirit to another clone body on some other uncharted planet? Of course, the fact that he survived his apparent death once already changes the way we have to look at another major outcome of Return of the Jedi, because we now know that, number 4, Darth Vader's sacrifice meant nothing. Viewed as a whole, the first 6 episodes of Star Wars are the story of the rise and fall and rise again of Anakin Skywalker. We follow his life from the time he was a child and see how Palpatine used his fear of losing his loved ones to corrupt him and turn him to the dark side, after which he spent years viciously imposing terror as the top enforcer of his emperor. In the end, Vader is redeemed and Anakin Skywalker re-emerges, as his love for his son Luke outweighed his loyalty to his master, whom he threw down the reactor shaft to save Luke's life. After all these years, and after all the terrible things he had done, Skywalker had come through, and by sacrificing his own life, fulfilled the prophecy of the Chosen One by bringing balance to the Force. Except now we know he did no such thing. The Emperor survived and, first through his creation Snoke, and later on his own, sought to subjugate the galaxy once more. In other words, Anakin died for nothing. He saved Luke in the moment, but the victory the prophecy foretold never came true, and all Anakin did was slow Palpatine down for a while. Of course, this means that we should consider the possibility that, number 3, Rey was the real Chosen One, not Anakin. The ancient Jedi prophecy foretold that a Chosen One would one day appear to bring balance to the Force, a prophecy the Jedi interpreted to mean that the Chosen One would destroy the Sith. However, the Sith were thought to be destroyed about 1,000 years before the events of the movies began, and not knowing that Darth Bane had survived and the Sith still operated in secret, the prophecy was all but forgotten for many centuries. That all changed when the Sith finally revealed themselves at around the same time the Jedi discovered a phenomenally powerful boy named Anakin Skywalker who appeared to have been conceived by the Force. Suddenly, the Jedi very much believed in the prophecy and began grooming Anakin for the role they expected him to ultimately play, never suspecting that his life would take the path it would, resulting in the near extinction of the Jedi themselves in the process. Given that, and the fact that he did not destroy the Sith after all, we should consider the possibility that Anakin was not the chosen one after all, but rather Rey was. The Skywalkers obviously played very important roles in the events that took place during their lifetimes, but really they wound up being merely supporting players for Rey, who ultimately was the one to destroy Palpatine, assuming it's for good this time, and take the mantle of the Jedi Order on her back. It wasn't an easy road, of course, since Anakin was long since dead by the time her adventure began, and with Ben on the other side and Luke initially unwilling to get involved, and then dying once he finally did, Rey had only one place to turn for her Jedi training after The Last Jedi ended, as we learned that, number 2, Leia did indeed train in the ways of the Jedi. While the revelation that Luke Skywalker was the son of Darth Vader was one of the biggest twists in movie history, it overshadowed another twist that Yoda revealed when he told Obi-Wan that if Luke failed to defeat the Sith, there was another whom they might turn to. It wasn't until Return of the Jedi when we learned that Leia was Luke's twin sister and the daughter of Darth Vader. While Luke was the one who eventually faced down both Vader and the Emperor, most assumed that Leia would in turn be trained by her brother in the years following the Galactic Civil War. That made it all the more puzzling when we finally got to Episode 7, and Leia was still sitting in HQ while everyone else did all the work like she usually had. Sure, we got the infamous Mary Poppins moment in Last Jedi, but aside from that, and an ability to sense when people she cared about were in trouble or dead, by all appearances, Leia either didn't wield the power her brother did, or simply chose not to explore her powers. This confounded longtime fans who expected her to come into the sequels packing the same kind of power that Luke did. Could she really not have learned anything about the ways of the Force at all during those 30 years? Well, as it turns out, she had indeed trained with Luke, and apparently gotten good enough to kick his butt, before voluntarily laying down her lightsaber and avoiding the use of her power because of a premonition of what might happen to her son if she continued. Obviously, she accomplished nothing by doing this because her son Ben was still swayed to the dark side by Snoke, confirming the sad reality that, number 1, history will continue to repeat itself as it always does. When the Jedi thought they destroyed the Sith 1,000 years ago, the Sith continued in secret for all that time, with the Jedi blissfully unaware of their existence. Finally, the Sith made their move. The Jedi were completely unprepared and were wiped out, and a Skywalker turned to the dark side to become the enforcer for his new master. By the time of Luke Skywalker, the Jedi were thought to be nothing more than a myth. Regardless, Luke Skywalker became the Jedi his father never could, and helped bring about the destruction of the Sith. Skywalker believed the danger gone, blissfully unaware that Palpatine had survived, and began building a new Jedi Order. Meanwhile, a new Darkseid master named Snoke, secretly controlled by Palpatine, built up in power until he made his move. The New Republic was wiped out, and a Skywalker turned to the dark side to become the enforcer for his new master. By the time of Rey, the Jedi were again thought to be nothing but a myth. Regardless, Rey became the Jedi even Luke never could, and helped bring about the destruction of the Sith, again. Given what we've already seen happen, it seems likely that more than a few decades won't pass before the dark side rears its head again in another new form to challenge the Jedi, who likely will once again have faded into legendary status by that time. There's no blood Skywalkers left to be a part of the story this time, but will Rey's descendants carry on the name and follow a similar path? That remains to be seen, but the adage that those who fail to learn from history are bound to repeat it certainly seems to fit where Star Wars is concerned. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below, and what else we learned from the movie that I didn't cover. If you'd like to help support the Star Wars Wavelength channel, please click subscribe to be notified whenever new videos are posted. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with you, always.